Welcome to Strange Truths and Tall Tales, the product of Newfoundland podcast. This is the place for anyone who's into Newfoundland stories, history, and culture. I'm Robert, your host and guide through the curious, the legendary, and well, sometimes the downright strange. You might know me from my writing at Product of Newfoundland or my short videos online where I explore the stories of this island. Here on the podcast, I bring those stories to life, from folklore to forgotten truths to the quirky traditions that make us who we are. In this episode, we're heading back to the early 1600s to tell the story of one of Newfoundland's most notorious figures, the pirate Peter Easton, a man who turned these shores into his base of operations, built power in Harbour Grace, and left behind stories that still echo around the island today, and maybe inspired the name of my hometown. And later, I'm joined by Newfoundland author and educator Tammy Hynes, whose writing brings that same sense of adventure and mystery into the present day. We'll talk about her Adventure Knox series, its first book, The Summer of Secrets, and how Newfoundland's past continues to inspire new stories. So settle in, maybe pour yourself a cup of tea, as we explore the stories that make Newfoundland what it is, one adventure at a time.
You're traveling through the fog, and just ahead is an island of mermaids, miracles, and monsters. Your next stop, Newfoundland. And these are its strange truths and tall tales.
If you'd been walking the rocky shoreline of Harbour Grace in the summer of 1612, you might have looked out in the bay and thought you were seeing a small navy. 10 or more ships, heavily armed and full of plunder, and under the command of one man, Peter Easton, the Pirate Admiral. Today he's remembered as one of the most successful pirates to ever sail under an English flag. And for a brief but memorable stretch, Newfoundland was his base of operations. Now, Easton is not your typical pirate story. He didn't die in battle, swinging from a mast with a knife in his teeth. He didn't hang from the gallows or vanish mysteriously in a storm. No, Easton lived to enjoy his riches, and even bought himself a palace. But long before that, he carved out a kingdom of his own right here in Newfoundland. Little's known about Easton's early life. Some believe he came from privilege. He certainly moved comfortable in elite circles. Others say he rose from humbler beginnings, climbing the ranks through grit and ambition. What we do know is that by the early 1600s, he was commanding ships under the banner of Queen Elizabeth I. In the beginning, Easton sailed not as a pirate, but as a privateer, a kind of legal pirate commissioned by the Crown. His mission was to defend English interests at sea, including the valuable fishing fleets off Newfoundland. He did this by attacking the ships of enemy nations. It was piracy, but with paperwork, and Easton took to it with enthusiasm and considerable success. But when James I took the English throne in 1603, he cancelled those privateering commissions. Easton, having developed a taste for the lifestyle, kept going. What had been crown-sanctioned plundering quickly became outright piracy. Easton was no longer a loyal servant of the state. He was an outlaw, and a wildly successful one. Flying the St. George's Cross from the mast of his ship, the Happy Adventure, Easton prowled the Mediterranean and the West Indies, attacking Spanish treasure ships, collecting gold, and even shaking down English vessels for protection money. By 1610, he was bold enough to take control of the Bristol Channel itself, bringing England's western ports to a standstill. It was an act that got the Crown's full attention. Lord Nottingham sent another former privateer, Henry Mannering, to hunt Easton down. But Easton, he slipped away, first to Africa, then across the Atlantic, and back to a place he'd come to know well, Newfoundland. Thanks to his days as a privateer, Easton knew the waters of Newfoundland well. More importantly, he knew what they offered. Hundreds of seasoned fishermen, sturdy ships, and well-provisioned storehouses. He didn't come looking for gold, he came looking for men. By 1612, he had set up shop in Harbour Grace. He built a fort, repaired ships, and recruited. Some volunteered for the thrill and promise of riches, others had to be persuaded. According to some estimates, he took as many as 1,500 men from the Newfoundland coast. Famed colonist John Guy narrowly avoided capture by Easton's men during their hunt for a new crew. His bark, en route to Renews, was fired upon, and one of the crew was injured. When the pirates realized who they'd shot at, they backed off. One of Easton's crew had wintered with Guy previously and vouched for him. They apologized and sailed on. Easton's relationship with Newfoundland settlers was complicated. He protected John Guy's colony at Cupper's Cove, now known as Cupid's, but refused to allow the establishment of another at Renews. He harassed ships at St. John's and Ferryland, but he also kept Basque and Portuguese pirates at bay. One man who got to know him well, maybe a little too well, was Sir Richard Whitbourne, who Easton captured and held prisoner for 11 weeks. Easton offered him treasure and command, hoping to recruit Whitbourne to his cause, but Whitbourne refused. Famous arch-pirate Peter Easton came there, Whitbourne wrote in his book A Discourse and Discovery of Newfoundland. I was kept 11 weeks under his command and had from him many golden promises. Easton eventually let him go on the condition that he'd return to England and seek a pardon on Easton's behalf. Now, ironically, that pardon had already been granted, but word hadn't reached Newfoundland yet, and by the time it did, Easton was gone. Some historians question the more dramatic accounts leading to Easton's final days in Newfoundland, but tradition holds that in 1614 he sailed south to Puerto Rico and captured a richly laden Spanish ship, the San Sebastian. When he returned to Harbour Grace, he found his fort had been seized by Basque pirates. Easton retaliated swiftly, retaking the fort, destroying the Basque force, and running their flagship aground. He met his goal, but not without a cost. Nearly 50 of his own men were killed in the battle, and there may be some physical evidence to support this story. The Conception Bay Museum notes that a mass grave was uncovered during construction of a new sewer line beside Coghlan United Church in Harbour Grace. The remains appear to match the early 17th century, and the site's location, just across the street from where Easton's fort once stood, adds weight to the theory that these could be the casualties of that bloody confrontation. After that, Easton moved his base to Ferryland, a more easily defended harbor. He sent another request to James I for clemency. While he waited for an answer, he led one final daring raid. Commanding 14 pirate ships and 500 men, he sailed to the Azores, where he captured a Spanish fleet from the West Indies loaded with silver. Easton brought the treasure to Tunisia and remained there for a year. From there, he sailed to Savoy and did something few pirates ever managed. He retired rich. The Duke of Savoy welcomed him. He bought a palace, lived in luxury, and was even granted the title Marquis of Savoy. One English agent, William Pankhurst, described meeting Easton in Savoy. This Easton has since been with me. He seemeth to have the age of 40 years. His countenance is rude and savage, which the Duke took notice of. His speech and carriage is slow, subtle, and guilty. His rude and savage countenance didn't seem to hold him back. Easton remained in Savoy, married well, and by 1620 had quietly vanished from the historical record. It was about as happy an ending as a pirate could hope for. No final battle, no dramatic death, just a man once veered across the Atlantic, slipping into comfortable obscurity. Most pirate stories end in betrayal or bloodshed. Not Peter Easton's. He broke the rules, shook the world, and when he'd had his fill, he walked away with gold in his pockets and a title to his name. Newfoundland was only one chapter in Easton's story, but it was an important one. It set the stage for his success. It was a place where fishermen became outlaws, where colonists dodged musket fire, and fleets of pirate ships rode high in the harbor. In the era of early English outposts and fishing stations, Newfoundland may have been synonymous with codfish. But for a time, it was something more. The beating heart of a pirate kingdom, and at its center was Peter Easton. I grew up surrounded by pirate stories. I'm from a small community on the Eastport Peninsula called Happy Adventure. It's a name you might recognize from the previous story. It was also the name of Peter Easton's ship. Some people will tell you the town was named after it. Well, maybe. But like most things in Newfoundland, there's more than one story. Another version, the one you'll find on a plaque in town, says a pirate, possibly Easton himself, ducked into one of the sheltered coves to escape the French Navy. He got away clean, called it a happy adventure, and the name stuck. Strangely enough, the plaque doesn't mention that Easton's flagship already carried that name, so take from that what you will. A less swashbuckling version credits surveyor George Holbrook. Holbrook arrived in the area in 1813 and later became Surveyor General of the colony. According to local lore, he took shelter from a storm in one of the coves, found it so calm, so comfortable, that he described the whole experience as a happy adventure, and seeing as he was the man drawing the maps, the name stuck. That's the version historians tend to favor. Makes sense. It's neat, tidy, and a little boring. There's also the idea that the first settlers chose the name themselves, not because of pirates or surveyors, but because of what the place offered. And when you look at it, you can see why. Nestled along the shores of Newman Sound, Happy Adventure has sheltered coves that take the edge off Atlantic storms. There's a small sandy beach, rare for outports, making it easier to land a boat. The forest comes right down to the shoreline, and there's enough flat ground and decent soil to grow a few crops. By outport standards, that's not nothing. And maybe it's enough. Maybe a place that made life just a little easier felt like a happy adventure. It is, after all, the little things. But if the Eastport Peninsula has its happy adventures, it also has its darker side. Just across the peninsula, the community now known as St. Chad's was once called Damnable, and the waters outside it Damnable Bay. The story I heard growing up was about a pirate trying to slip through the area unnoticed, only to be betrayed by the constant ringing of the ship's bell. Damn the bell, he cursed, and the name evolved into Damnable. The town kept that name until the 1890s when a minister convinced residents to change it to St. Chad's. Damnable Bay didn't change, though. It's still on the maps, along with the fantastic damnable trails that wind through the area today. And then there's Sandy Cove, home to one of the best beaches around, and of course, another pirate story. Some say the community was once called Silver Buckle, named for a treasure buried nearby. In certain versions, the pirate returned to claim it, only to wreck on the rocks outside the cove, losing everything. And maybe the loot is still out there. I don't think there's any evidence the name Silver Buckle was ever used, but there is an old tale from nearby Bar Harbor, which is no longer a settlement, about a ghostly pirate named Silver Buttons said to guard a hidden treasure. So maybe that story morphed. That one might be worth its own episode, though. Up next, we're going to head to Renews. Tammy L. Hynes is a Newfoundland-based writer and educator. Currently, Hynes is working on 2 fiction series, Adventure Knox, a young adult historical adventure series set in 1930s Newfoundland, and an adult paranormal murder mystery series titled The Wells of Truth, which is also set in the province. Her work blends historical fact and fiction into compelling stories that appeal to a wide cross-section of readers. She joins me today to talk about Adventure Knox, pirates, and how family history can become fantastic fiction. I've got to say, I've really enjoyed your book, Adventure Knox, The Summer of Secrets. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what the book is about.
So the book is basically, it's historical fiction. It's my favorite genre. It's historical in that it brings in a lot of Newfoundland historical characters, and a lot of the things, the main character, T. Knox, is my grandmother. A lot of the things that she goes through as a child are real, are her real life. Obviously, it's fictitious because the adventure she goes on doesn't actually happen. But I've always thought, especially as an educator, it's a great way for kids to learn little snippets of history while being entertained at the same time.
I think you've definitely achieved that with this book. It's an entertaining book that I think people will really like. As I would get to the end of the one chapter, I'd be like, well, I have to read one more chapter because I just want to see where this is going. But I was hooked right from the beginning because this story did not start where I thought it would start. I don't know how much we want to reveal about it, but it starts with a well-known Newfoundland historical figure. I don't know if you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Sure, yeah, it's not a secret. Sir Richard Squires, who was one of our prime ministers here in Newfoundland before we joined Canada, or Canada joined us, depending on how you want to look at that.
I like it that way.
He was a bit of a controversial character, and yeah, he was in power in the 30s, and he was. They say the reason we lost responsible government, not necessarily all him, but a big part of it. And so, starting with him was important to me because that's that beginning thing that happens in the book with him is true. It really happened. My grandmother really did meet him in that way, and I thought it was a nice little slip into how adventure just seemed to follow her whole life. She was plopped into the middle of some interesting situations.
I'm going to probe that a little bit more. And it is the opening chapter, so we're not revealing too much here. But she witnessed the aftermath of the riot in 1930s.
Yeah, so the riots went on for a few days. I don't, drag it out that much, but the culmination of the riots, that 10,000 people, a lot of people in Newfoundland at the time, were gathered around the Colonial Building. My grandma lived at the time on Bannerman Street, right dead across from government building there, in a tenement. Her family was very, very poor. And Sir Richard Squires escaped the mob, ran down Bannerman Street and into one of the neighbors' houses, out through the back door and down the alleyway. Wasn't really fences there, that part is fictitious. But yeah, he ran through my grandmother's backyard while she was playing, and she saw this guy go by, and she knew who he was because she was very intelligent, very inquisitive child. And she told me that story when I was young, and just like her, I was hooked. I was like, oh yes, adventure. I love it.
That is an amazing story. I mean, it feels like a part of our history that is almost mythologized. Like we know about that run that he took from Colonial Building, and for her to have witnessed it, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, yeah. As a very young girl, and it did leave a mark on her because she understood what was happening because she was pretty, heard the adults talk, that sort of thing. But yeah, to see him running past was, I guess, one of the most bizarre things she'd ever seen in her, very young, sheltered life.
So I guess we know where your main character, Adventure Knox, comes from. She comes from your family history.
That's absolutely true.
Did that make the process easier, being able to draw on that kind of stuff from your family, or did it make it more difficult?
No, it actually it made it incredibly easy. There is a second book that is already finished. There's a few books in this series because my grandmother was very adventurous and told a lot of stories, and I guess I inherited that from her. I spent a lot of time with her as a teenager, listening, soaking in those stories, and wrote a lot of them down because I didn't want to forget them. So just teasing them out and making them into something a little bit bigger, a little more readable, has actually been a joy because she's been gone now for quite some time, about 20 years or more. And it's just nice. It's nice to revisit those memories.
It sounds amazing. One of my regrets in life, my grandfather was a great storyteller, and I just wish I'd asked more questions when he was telling the stories, and that I could remember more of them, I think that's one of the things maybe for me as I've gotten older, I just, regret for all the things that we've lost in the past, all the stories and adventures that our ancestors have that we just don't remember anymore. Big adventures and small adventures. Tease has an interesting start in the story. It goes someplace quite different from that.
Yeah.
It involves pirates.
Yes, yes. I mean, politicians, pirates, not very different, especially
Maybe not.
nowadays. Depends on your take on it. But yeah, but she moves to rural Newfoundland. And if, I'm sure your listeners are quite, aware that there's a million pirate stories in Newfoundland. And my little small town of Renews here is no different. We have, a pirate story as well. I figure if I had a nickel for every pirate story around Newfoundland, I wouldn't need to find the treasure. I'd be rich. So it was just a natural kind of thing to bring in there as a very kiddie kind of adventure, because it was one of the very first stories I remember her telling me when I was young.
Yeah, I agree with you about the pirate story thing. I grew up in Eastport, Happy Adventure area, and all the place names there are legends about them going back to pirates. And I joke that I spent my childhood feeling like maybe I was one of the Goonies and we were going to go on an adventure anytime and find pirate treasure kind of thing. So I definitely related to your character in this story because I thought these are the kinds of things I imagined when I was a kid. So this story definitely is a personal story, but I think it's got a wide appeal. Who do you think will be the primary audience for this story?
Surprisingly, I mean, as a teacher, I teach high school, and I basically wrote it thinking young adults, right? And people around here who would probably be from Renews and stuff. I've been kind of very surprised by the people who've been calling me up and leaving reviews and buying it, and it's done very, very well. It has mass appeal, apparently, and not just people who are familiar with this area, but like people from Newfoundland, people who have some connection to Newfoundland, people from Ireland. Like it reminds them of their childhood. or their parents' childhood that they heard about. So it's been interesting, the comments that I've gotten, which is very nice to hear. As a writer, I always say you're your own worst critic, but it's nice to hear people connecting to the stories their own personal way. I love that.
I'm not surprised about the mass appeal. Like I said, I definitely think I can see where a younger reader would really appreciate the story and really be able to relate to the story. But anybody who was a child, I think, can also tap into that and relate to the story. So I definitely can see why people far and wide are attracted to this story, and I think anybody should read it. It's really great. I don't know how much you like to talk about this, but what was your writing process like for the story?
Oh my goodness. So I wrote the outline of this book probably about 20 years ago. And then life happened, and I moved away to Los Angeles, and I moved home about, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago. And being back here, and a lot of the people who shared these stories with me are no longer here. My, grandparents have passed on, my dad has passed on, and my children, who are in their 20s and 30s now, love these stories and are now trying to tell them to friends of theirs and calling me up. Mom, what was that story again? And I was like, you know what? I need to dust that off. I need to write it. And it actually came together very, very fast because I had the outline ready to go. And I mean, I would say not the completed book, but the first draft was written in less than 2 weeks.
Oh, that's wild.
It was almost manic. It was almost manic. But it was a labor of love because I really was like reliving hearing those stories and stuff. So for me, it was very therapeutic, actually.
As we've alluded to, there's another book coming, and maybe more after that.
Yes.
Was that always the plan?
Yes, in a sense, when I originally thought the idea, and the name Adventure Knox just hit me in the head one day driving. I was like, oh my God, that's a perfect name for it. And I thought about three very specific adventures that my grandmother had. And I was like, those would make three nice little books. But since then, it was like one of three when I put it out literally last year. And now it looks like more of 4 or 5, maybe, because as I'm writing them, more and more things are coming to my head and reminding me of stuff. And there's probably going to be quite a few. She's going to need to live a long time in these books.
It hadn't really occurred to me that your grandmother's life would be also the inspiration for the subsequent ones. I didn't realize she had.
Oh yes,
that it would be her adventures in the subsequent ones.
Yeah, she like I said, my kids grew up hearing me tell the stories about Nan and Pop Hynes, or Nanny was a Knox before she was Hynes, and they have said to me their whole lives that their lives sound like they should be a Hollywood movie. Like, this so interesting and so adventurous. And I thought to myself, yeah, well, you know what? I think other people might like to hear about this. So, and then you got to weave a little bit of, interesting stuff in there, like a pirate treasure or something, right?
So are you much like your grandmother?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I look exactly like her.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly like her. Her wedding picture, you're looking at what she looked like. It's like exactly.
How about in terms of the adventures you've had?
I've had quite a few, yes. Had quite a few. Like I said, I lived in LA for quite a while. I was married to a sergeant from the LAPD, so I could probably write a couple of books about my own adventures. My first teaching assignment was South Central LA, so yeah, a few stories.
Well, we will read those books too.
Stand by for the book.
Now, this is not your first foray into writing.
No. I've had a few other things, quite a few. I did wrote a history book many years ago for this community, which kind of helped with this. because I was dragging together legends, stories, shipwrecks, all of that kind of thing. And yeah, I was the editor of a political cookbook, if you could believe it or not, which is how they went together. But anyway, yeah, that one was probably the most interesting thing I've done.
I read about that in your bio, Politics of the Kitchen, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, what an interesting book. I think you're right, that marriage of two things, that political figures and cooking, didn't necessarily jump out at me as like an obvious two ideas that should obviously be tied together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how I came up with it and why. The reasoning is we had a heritage group here in Renews, and we were endeavoring to raise some money to help support an archaeological dig that we had going at the time. It was a test dig, and this was an idea I came up with. Let's put out. Someone had said to me, "Remember years ago, the Kinsmen and Kennets used to put out the cookbooks, and schools would do it." And I was like, "That is a great." But I have a better idea. Let me talk to my uncle, who just happens to be Loyola Hearn, who was a member of Parliament at the time. And of course, then he connected me with everybody else. And it's funny because a lot of the politicians in it are not people that people would even probably recognize now. I mean, people our age would. But yeah, there was like John Effort, gave me a lovely diabetic recipe. And Sven Robinson, I think it was, who was an MP from out west, he gave me something about octopus, like cooked octopus or something. It became really, really popular. It was covered in the Telegram and on CBC radio and stuff like that, because it was such a juxtaposed idea.
And that makes it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had to have something different than other people were doing and something that was going to sell. So it sold well, and we, able to raise money to support the dig.
Awesome. So we know there's more Adventure Knox coming. There's no more political recipes coming in the near future.
No, well, I know. I doubt it.
Any other writing that you're doing now?
Actually, there is. I am a big lover of everything paranormal and, murder mysteries, that sort of thing. And I kind of comboed the two of them. I actually have another book that hit the shelves a little bit ago, a couple of months ago, is called Beauty Beneath. And it's a prequel to a series of supernatural type novels. Again, set in Newfoundland, in the city type area, a little bit more like fictitious names and that sort of thing. But when people read, they'll be like, I know what she's talking about there, I know where that is. But, nothing factual in any of those versus this Adventure Knox. It's very, out there, supernatural, ghosts, hauntings, murders. There's always someone dies in those books.
Yeah. I was going to say, you're very on brand for this podcast. We've got, with Adventure Knox, we've got the Strange Truths covered, and with this other series, we're very much into the tall tales. And so let's close it up by returning to the Adventure Knox series. What is it you hope people take away from the book?
For the most part, most of the people who I've spoken with about the book, it's given them a great sense of nostalgia. I don't know, the way the world is today, I think people like connecting to that simpler concept, small town, everybody working together like they do in the book, and because that's the way it's always been here. And I think everybody who has talked to me about it, it's like, oh, it just felt so much like home. And that's a great compliment to get as a writer, because I wrote it from my heart. And it's one of those things, if you're an artist or a writer, you write it. It's kind of like, yeah, it's nice that someone buys it, but that's not the purpose of writing it. So when others are getting the same enjoyment out of it, that bestills my heart. So yeah, I mean, if anybody is interested in adventures and historical fiction, or Newfoundlandia, um, definitely, it's all in there. It's all in there.
I do think that anybody from anywhere could enjoy this story, but I do think also that you capture this place very well in the story. Like, I recognize the world that you describe, even though it happened, many, many years before either of us was born.
Yes.
It's still recognizably Newfoundland, I think.
Yeah.
And I guess for this story, it with its personal connection to you, it really couldn't be said anywhere else.
Yeah, no. Having tramped around the world now, there's no place like home. I'm definitely Dorothy when it comes to that. I think we just have way too much here to inspire that. I think most of my writing will always be inspired by something in Newfoundland.
I look forward to see what else you have to write about this place as we go forward. Where can people get this book?
So it is available on Amazon. It's available in softcover, hardcover, and Kindle, because I know people like their ebooks nowadays. I'm guilty as well. I have copies here. Anyone can search me up on Facebook as Tammy L. Hynes, or I have a website. It's also currently in a few stores, which, for the season. Unfortunately, rural Newfoundland has a season now, so it will be in like stores along the southern shore, Cape Royal, Fairyland, and it's going to be out around Trinity Bay as well. So it's slowly creeping into stores. If you go into a store and ask for it and they don't have it, have them contact me. I'll make sure you get it.
Awesome. I will put links on the podcast episode page to those places that you just talked about, and a link directly to Amazon so people can link into it there. Thank you very much for joining me today. I very much enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. I loved it.
Thanks to Tammy L. Hynes for joining me on this episode. And if you enjoyed that conversation, be sure to check out her Adventure Knox series, starting with The Summer of Secrets. It's available everywhere through Amazon and in stores here in Newfoundland and Labrador. If you'd like to hear more about Sir Richard Squires and the Newfoundland Riot of 1932, check out the short Season 1 episode of Strange Truths and Tall Tales called Rant, Roar, and Riot. You can also hear more about pirates in the episode on Black Bard in Newfoundland, in which I explore the tale of the notorious pirate Bartholomew Roberts and his alleged attack on Trepassey. And thank you for listening to Strange Truths and Tall Tales. From the real-life escapades of Peter Easton to the stories of Happy Adventure to the exciting exploits of Adventure Knox, it all speaks to the same thing. Newfoundland has always been a place where fact and fiction blur. If you're looking for more, you can find plenty of history, folklore, and curious tales on the Product of Newfoundland blog and in past seasons of the podcast. If you'd like more of this, follow the show. There are plenty of tangly, timeless, and totally true-ish Newfoundland stories still to come.